about mercy, and I want to talk about peace, and I want to start with this text that we read this morning. Cease from what's angry. Forsake wrathfulness. Do not fret, for it only causes harm. The natural meaning of this divine command is obvious to everybody who has any knowledge of the Word at all, and any mature reflection on the experiences of their own life. I think all of us have been angry. We've experienced anger in our lives. From the literal sense of the Scriptures, everyone can have a general sense of what it is to do evil, and certainly everybody's lived enough to know something about the nature of anger and wrath. In a natural way, and I mean a natural way, you can even see why God commands that we cease from anger and forsake wrathfulness. The thing is, anger and wrath temporarily take away a person's ability to reason and think from rationality. It's almost a kind of dry, drunk state. At least that's how I've experienced it when I look back on the times in my own life when I've wrestled particularly with temper, which is sort of the most visible form of anger. Comes exploding out. And in states of anger, people are inclined to commit deeds that are foolish, that are disorderly, that are disruptive of the uses of our life in this world. Because states of anger like this can bring unpleasant results on the person that's in them, common sense can tell you that it's a good thing to try to avoid. A person doesn't even need to be religious, really doesn't even need to believe in God, to acknowledge the wisdom of working to try to avoid to be angry with the neighbor. So, one of the questions I had in my mind this morning is, if we know that, if it's kind of a common sense thing, if we can see it for ourselves, why does God go out of His way and take the time to tell us about it in the Word? Because we know that it's not the purpose of revelation to reveal things to us that we can learn for ourselves through observation and experience and things like that. Those things we don't need the Word for. We need the Word for things that we can't learn that way. From the heavenly doctrine, you can see two very important reasons for this command, to cease from evil and forsake wrath, being included in the Word. The first reason is really uncovered when you know what's going on inside the story. That's why I love being a Swedenborgian. I love getting in touch with what's going on underneath the text. And, for that matter, underneath the text of our own lives. How does it apply to our own regeneration? From this knowledge, you can start to see the real source and nature of what it is to be angry. We can see for ourselves that these states aren't outcroppings of someone's cultural environment or lingering passions from some supposed animal ancestry. They're the presence of evil love of hell that all of us are inclined to in different ways from our heredity. And when we know that, we have the responsibility to do something about it, to try to work and control it, to shun it even as a sin against God. So what's the number two reason that it shows up in the gospel? The writings make it clear that it's one thing to do something because it seems to work, because it seems like the best policy, because it seems to serve the best interest of our reputation or honor or gain. And it's another thing to do it because, listen, God commands you to do it. It's another thing to do it because it's a command of the Lord. And if we're developing our relationship to Him in love, we come to want to do those things that He teaches us from love, looking to love. If we're controlling it because it just serves our best interests or makes us look better to other people, then we're not really doing anything to rid ourselves of these states on the inside. If we only work at control on the surface, anger can stay with us like a smoldering fire, ready to burst into flames. And it finally does, if not in this world, then the next, when a tendency goes unchecked like this, and our selfish loves get frustrated by not being able to achieve their goals. When the line between internal and external is removed that cloaks our true thoughts and feelings while working toward our desired end. So to remove states of anger from our life, the writings tell us that the cause has to be removed. And the cause is the love of evil and falsity that hell tries to inspire in our selfish will, or the old will, it sometimes calls it. To control anger from divine command means that we acknowledge that that anger is opposed to God and opposed to God's purposes. It's opposed to His loving and wise plan for our life. So, what is that plan? Heaven. So it's opposed to heaven. It's the opposite of heaven. It's only when we have this kind of spiritual acknowledgement and a sincere effort is made to shun the tendency as a sin against God that we start to be open to the Lord performing the work of removing that anger from our life. In the letter of the Word, there's sometimes the appearance that God Himself goes through states of anger and wrath, and this can be confusing to people. There are countless Old Testament passages that refer to the anger and the wrath of God. I'm just going to give you a few examples. We'd be here for a long time if I was going to go and systematically try to cite them all. And there's some striking examples. For instance, Psalm 90. We're consumed by your anger, and by your wrath we're troubled. He sent upon them the wrath of His anger, indignation and fury and distress, and an inroad of evil angels. He leveled a path for His anger. He didn't spare their soul from death. That's Psalm 78. Then there's Isaiah 13. Behold, the day of Jehovah comes. Cruel. That's not how you think of Jehovah, is it? With indignation, wrath, and anger, to make the earth a wasteland, that He might destroy the sinners from out of it. Okay. Confused yet? I think even with all we know, it's easy to read the literal statement and kind of get caught in that and start thinking, what's going on here? What's going on under the surface? How does this jive with what we know to be true? That God is never angry. Because we know that God only ever loves. I'm going to say that again because that's my first simple truth statement for today. God is never angry with you. God only ever loves you and only ever wants what's best for you. So we know that He's never wrathful with anyone, never curses anyone, never punishes or destroys anyone, never leads them into temptation. That's why I love that phrase in the prayer. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. So you see the two sides of the human regenerative path there, the appearance and the reality. The appearance, when we're wrestling from a natural world set of circumstances, is that, where are you, God? You know, and it can feel at times like He's responsible for the evil happening in your life. The reality is He's working to deliver you from it, and you're the one responsible. So He's working with you to help you take responsibility and accountability for that so that you're open to His love, removing that tendency from your life. We know that these things can't come from a God who is the fountain of all mercy and peace and goodness and heavenly happiness. And by the way, that whole phrase is in the Heavenly Doctrine. It's in the Arcana, or Heavenly Secrets, 245. So the question is, why does He appear angry and wrathful and punishing and killing and all sorts of other terrible things that we know aren't true about God? When asked why the letter of Scripture was written to seem to predicate anger of the Lord, wrath and other things, we're told that this was the only possible way of preserving any idea whatsoever of an all-powerful God with people at the time. And I want you to remember that Old Testament mindset that's being addressed. Prove it to me. You know, like when the children of Israel said to Moses, "Who made you a judge and a ruler over us?" That's that first stage of our spiritual development where we're getting in touch with some truth, we're starting to make contact with it, we're starting to realize we need to rise above our current level of thinking, and we're wrestling against it. Who made you a judge, Lord? Who made you king and ruler over me? You know? And then there's the prove it to me phase, which the children of Israel also went through. And then there's the you left us out here in the wilderness to die phase, as it's really starting to get integrated, because then it's really wrestling against that old selfish will part of us that's still alive and kicking and trying to assert its authority. And then we start to move toward what I like to call the peace passages, like in Revelation. There will be no more death and sorrow and crying and pain, for the former things, the things of the old will, have passed away. So we're told that these Old Testament passages were addressed to an Old Testament mindset. and that they needed to understand that first basic reality that God is in charge of their life before they could understand anything else. A God who governs and disposes every single thing into order in the universe. This overarching truth is so fundamental to the life of religion that God preserved it, even when people were at their most barbaric period. He preserved it with the children of Israel because they had to start from that basic reality of there's something other in charge of my life than me. He preserved it in the only way they could think of God in their perverted state. The doctrines say they couldn't believe anything other than Jehovah entertained hatred, was angry with them, was full of wrath, was furious, and for this reason it's expressed in the word according to the appearance. The Lord appears to a person. Here's how this passage ends. Listen, guys. The Lord appears to a person according to his quality of life. So he can't appear to us in a way other than how we're thinking of him, that doesn't accord with how we're currently thinking of him. So if that thought of him is constrained to a wrestling against the basic reality of God's power over our life, and we're negatively wrestling against our selfishness in that regard, then that's how God's going to show up for us. He's going to show up as angry and punishing and wanting to remove the joy because that's what we're going through. We're wrestling against that selfish stuff that we used to find so enjoyable and starting to realize there's another destiny. And there's pain associated with that. There's things we have to give up. Jesus, same thing. During his life in the world, it said he had to leave behind those factual knowledges that he had garnered starting from his earliest childhood. He had to leave those more base knowledges behind in favor of something bigger and better and brighter and deeper. And you know what it says he went through? Grief. Jesus Christ, God of the universe, grieved at those more natural things that he had to leave behind in order to more interiorly progress. Same thing's true for us. It says that if God were to have spoken differently than as people had apprehended him, it would have been to sow seed in the waters and to say something which would have been immediately rejected. So he started with this most basic of truths in the Old Testament and hammered it over and over and over in as many different ways and from as many different perspectives as they could start to grasp it, even in as lowly a state as they were in. The Lord allowed the revelation to be given according to the appearance because of the totally sensual state of people. But he provided that external appearance would be able to correspond to our process of regeneration down the line. And remember, regeneration is just moving from what's worldly and the love of those things to the loves of heaven. But we had to be rational enough to conceive of that as the process first. So it was sort of a holdover state. He conveyed as much truth about himself in the appearance according to what they could understand so that he wouldn't be sowing seed in the waters. So that that same truth could be drawn upon to help us sense the trajectory of his love through all the different stages of our regeneration later on when our minds were capable of doing that. Now we're able to see beyond the surface what lies beneath the literal text, that wonderful, life-saving truth that lies underneath. Here's another, what I like to call, slam-bang passage from Heavenly Secrets. It says, spiritual truths open to the understanding so that people can now see and understand God on a rational level. As this starts to happen, the external and fallible appearances of the letter of the Word start to vanish away. Kind of a neat parallel to the example we used with the children this morning. So we're not supposed to be stuck in there. It's supposed to be a staging ground or a tool we use to move deeper in our understanding of God. So now we start to see what's meant in the letter of the Word by states of anger and wrath that are attributed to the love of the Lord. Anger, and remember the whole correspondence by opposition principle, or things that are symbolized are context-driven. Anger actually means the operation of God's love in what's merciful and good. Wrath means the operation of his wisdom, the laws of order, and the truth that brings judgment. And as love and wisdom start to work together, so we find in the Scripture that the words anger and wrath are most often placed together. The writings tell us that when anger is attributed to the Lord, the angels understand it as meaning the mercy of His love in protecting from evil and removing what's evil from our lives. When wrath is attributed to God, the angels hear the destruction and punishment of the work of those that are opposed to the divine, who want to inflict violence on those developing angels, people who He's working to protect. So what they hear when they hear those things is the truth standing in judgment of things that are evil and false in our lives. If we don't understand what's going on in the internal sense, the whole subject of anger is pretty obscure. If we're going to understand how to deal with anger and wrath when it comes up in our own lives, we've got to start with the recognition that these qualities don't come from God. They don't come from God. It is not okay to be angry in the new church. They come from us. They come from hell. They're opposed to the love of the Lord. When the words anger and wrath are used in Scripture about us, they're talking about evil and falsity that we're still working out of our human heritage as a people. In the spiritual sense, it means a departing of charity, turning away from what's loving toward what's worldly. So when God says in the first part of the text, cease from anger, He means stop, children, turning away from me. I love you. Stop turning away from love to your neighbor. Stop turning away from a good life. Stop doing what is evil and learn to do good. That's even a direct quote from the Psalms. Then He says, forsake wrath. This means departing from the things of faith, turning away from truth toward falsity. Falsity and evil also go hand in hand. A person doesn't depart from evil without forsaking falsity, and vice versa. So it shows that states of anger or wrath are the result of evil and false loves inside of us, whether or not we've confirmed them in the heart yet. And it shows us that the cause of these states isn't everything out here, and that's what we love. It's not everything out here. It doesn't come from the environment or from external pressures or circumstances. So we can't say, doggone, if that guy just hadn't done this thing that made me angry. If he'd just listened to reason. We can't say people or things or circumstances are the cause of our anger. Nobody's responsible for our anger but us. When we do that, when we start saying that guy or that thing or that circumstance made us angry, you see the subtle tool of the hells there starting to remove from us the responsibility for our own states and actions? It's their fault. Spiritual power comes from self-examination, from seeing the truth in the critique and starting to work toward a change from the sight of that truth. When we make something responsible for the anger other than us, we remove accountability that we have to shun these things inside of ourselves. Everyone receives from their inheritance the tendency to get angry, to get really ticked when things don't go their way. And it may not show up on the surface. Still means that it's something we got to work on. And the thing is, we're all prone to this because we all have that inclination to love self, to love what is selfish, to love what is evil. And here's the rub, as Shakespeare says. God reveals the nature of angry and wrathful states not so that we can use them to judge somebody else, or somebody else's spiritual life, or somebody else's walk with God. It's so that we can start to intellectually look at our own and make some informed decisions intelligently about who we don't want to be anymore and who we do want to start to be with God's help. It's true that for the protection of society, we're required to make a kind of external judgment on a person's action or deeds. But we've got to be really careful about how we do that. We have to learn to separate the behavior from the person. We don't know what's going on inside another person's life. We only know what's showing up on the outside, and that's a very limited sight of truth. We're still supposed to call an evil when it shows up externally, but we can't use that same statement of external reality to internally sum somebody else up. The writings tell us that a zeal to protect what's good can have at times the same appearance as anger. But even though they look the same on the outside, they couldn't be more different on the inside in terms of what's driving them. In Heavenly Secrets, we're told that they who are in zeal fight, but they don't fight from any enmity or hostility. They work toward charity. What makes zeal different from anger is the fact that zeal has inside of it love, the good of charity. So when zeal fights, it works to remove those who are in falsity and evil and to prevent them from hurting people who are working toward loving and true lives. On the other hand, listen, anger not only seeks to remove them, but then keeps going, keeps chasing, keeps working, pursues them with hatred and revenge. From charity, zeal wishes well even to people who are in evil and falsity, and also does well to them so far as they don't injure the good. But anger, from hatred and revenge in it, wishes to harm everyone it fights with, whether or not they're in good or evil, it says. So that quality that makes you want to say, I made my point, I'm going to get them again, and I'm going to get them again, that's anger. That's not zeal. One clear way to know the difference. You know, and who hasn't been there, honestly? Everybody raise your hands. That's a clear way to know the difference. That's one of the Lord's tools for helping us to know the difference. Wishing harm to everyone we fight with, whether good or evil. Zeal, friends, works for nothing but what's good. It is patient and tender and merciful, with nothing any more of the qualities of anger and wrath inside of them. Because we're human, our judgment is always going to be questionable. Most of the time, it's going to be an error when we try determining the difference between anger and zeal, especially with somebody else. But that's not really as important as being aware of our own responsibility to examine our states and try to control and shun the states of anger and wrath that rise up from the hells. And to know that God is never angry. God only loves you. He only loves His children. He only loves and cares for and is working with all of us away from the chaos of selfish and worldly living toward a more heavenly life. But it's a process, and it happens step by step. God tells us that if we take up our cross and follow Him this way, taking responsibility for our spiritual life, He works to bring us gently and gradually into things like peace and good cheer and true happiness, where we don't have to be restless and angry and bitter anymore. And that's why He said this. Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you true rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Amen.
Thank you for listening. To learn more, visit newchurch.org.